Weathering and rusting up your miniatures can be pretty tricky and long-winded. At least that's what I used to think. Join me as I show you 3 quick and easy ways to add rust and corrosion to your miniatures. I'm Peachy, and this is Peachy Tips. So in this video, I'm going to be covering 3 different methods of painting rust onto your miniatures. The first one is going to be pretty straightforward, just using some shades. Then I'm going to move on to using some dirty down rust, and then I'm going to finish off with some streak and grime. Streak and grime is probably less rusty, it's just more dirt and grime. And they all have varying results and different speeds to them as well. I like all the methods, and you could even combine all 3 if you really wanted to. But I've done it in the medium of using some Fallout figures. I got the Power Armor Troopers, the plastic ones, sculpted by Colin Grayson. Thank you very much, Colin. They're awesome figures. They're quite multi-part as well. You've got a few options in there. Originally was going to do them all as Brotherhood of Steel, but you know what? You could use them as Raiders, Gunners. There's so many different factions in Fallout. If you're watching this and you don't even know what the game is, you never played the game, it's really good. There's so many factions, so many. I mean, I could just riff off a few, like there's Raiders, there's Gunners, which are like badass sort of mercenary military guys. You got things like the Railroad, the Minutemen. And then there's like really obscure ones like the Republic of Dave. Who doesn't want to join the Republic of Dave? I like Dave. Let's join his Republic. Sounds fun. So my first model is going to be painting the actual Maximus figure that you can buy separately. It's a resin figure. The others are plastic. I really like Maximus. He's a great character in the show. So it feels right just to paint him up anyway. So I'll do more traditional methods with this guy using base coat, shades, highlights and washes. And then we'll move on to the other techniques in a moment or two after that. Right, let's get cracking. The first thing I'm going to do for all of the models is spray them with silver here. I'm just using some lead belcher, just giving it a quick dust over, trying not to overpower it too much. There we are, you can see Maximus is now sprayed. I also did a little conversion on one arm because I didn't want his arm being in the way over his face. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some black and just put that in some of the recesses where there's joins, like the rubbery joins in the armour. Obviously check reference and stuff like that. There's lots of different bits that are black. Some is a bit of artistic license. I'm not entirely sure if it's right or not, but I don't really care because it just looked cool, help break the shape up a bit. So I'll just make sure I'm going round, thinning it down. Any black will do, I've just used some black. Also picking out the head as well completely because that covers the hair. Also base coats the face as well. Then just to pick out some extra details, I'm going to use some death metal for some of the other working parts. Again, some of this is artistic license. It's just breaking the shape up a bit. Not entirely sure if the gun had that mount, but I mean, the danger is if I don't do this, it could just look too much like a shapeless mass of silver, so it just helps break it up. And I don't even know what this is, but I'm just going to coat that in death metal too. So next up is to pick out all the brown details. So I'm going to start off with the skin. For this I'm using bootstrap brown. That will obviously get some highlights as well and some different tones added to it, but I'm also using the same colour for any like wooden bits on the gun, like the stock and the grip. So just work my way around. It's picked out. Then I'm going to coat the whole lot in some deep shade. I wanted a bit of a matte finish, which is why I've used some deep shade here because it dries quite matte. I'm just going to go all over the armour, making sure it's completely coated. In places, if it starts to pull, you can just soak off any excess with your brush, but really adding it just to every nook and cranny where I can. This is pretty much getting the model prepared. So next up is to get some gun metal, and here I'm going to layer up some of the raised areas. I'm not going to be too precious about it, it's just picking out those raised details, mostly where the sun's going to catch it. It is going to be slightly different in coloration to start off with, but actually once it dries, and certainly in real life, it looks very different to as it does on camera, but it does pick out the light really nicely, and all that grimy, dry, matted stuff is in the recesses, which feels more realistic as well. So I'm just going around, picking anything that's a bit rounded, or feel like it's catching the light with gun metal. Another option is just to do a bit of an overbrush for a bit of speed. I didn't really dry brush with this, I just removed a little bit on my hand and then just went over, so you could do that. But for more detail, probably just use a smaller brush. Depends how many models you got to do. For a highlight, I'm going to do some dry brushing here. This is where I'm going to remove most of it off onto the tissue and just flick out over on those edges. So again, just work your way around, keeping it to the top sections of the model, again, where the light's going to catch it. You can go all the way around if you really wanted to, but I'm just keeping it to areas that the sun might catch. And to make the gun feel a little bit more different, because they're just both silver right now, I'm just going to do a couple of coats of dark tone on this just to knock it back a bit. So it makes it a slight darker silver, more of a gun metal. Then it's just tying up the face with that bootstrap brown. Picking out the cheeks, the nose, the brows, basically the extremities. And then I'm going to move on to a highlight of using onyx skin. Again, just doing the same thing, picking out the extremities. Also, I won't use this on the gun stock. I've left the gun stock as is. So it's just for the face. Then to add some warmth, I'm going to use some rust tone on the face so it looks less flat. And then of course I'm going to use it on the power armor because, well, we're painting rust here. So I'm subtly applying this. I'm not going to go mad. I'm just going to apply it in some of the deeper recesses initially. And as I move around the model, I might make some decisions, put some elsewhere, but it's subtle. This guy's been looking after his armor. It gets a bit of a polish or a bit of a clean. It's not like super rusted up. So yeah, just adding it into like some of the deeper cracks. Really like this paint, it's so good. It reminds me of the rust effect you see on the armor in the game, which I really like. Just work your way around. Now I'm just going to drop in some black into the eyes. If you do make a mistake, just add a bit of water or just soak off your brush and just move it around. Then I thought I'd add some extra colour to the armour. He's got a little shield design on his wrist, so I'm going to pick that out with some red. Again, normally I would recommend doing stuff in the base coat stage, but actually, because you've tied up with some silver, you can just pick out your design, get that sort of sorted as to how you want it, and then you can just cut back in with that gunmetal, because you've already used gunmetal here to do some tidying up. So a little bit of shade if you think it needs it, but it doesn't. You're quite subtle about it. I'm also going to try and do a very stylized version of the Brotherhood of Steel design that's on the front. It is quite small, this model is, so I just did like some little dots to represent like the cogs and things. Add a little bit more for the wings underneath, and then a line for the sword. And then all we need to do now is just get him based. To begin with, I'm just going to get some Sandy Desert and apply that to Maximus's base. And then once I've applied a couple of dollops of the desert paint or the texture paint, I'm then just going to add some water as well. I always do this, especially around the feet, because I get a little bit more control. It's not going to get like loads of texture paint all the way up his ankles and stuff like that. So just work your way around, any details. Obviously, because I've got texture on here as well, it added to the bumps, the peaks and troughs of the actual texture of the base, which is great. Leave it to dry, then apply, I'm using some of that rust tone because I quite like the effect of it. So apply a wash of your choice. Here I'm using the rust tone. Again, apply a couple of dollops and then some water actually onto the texture as well. Now, like a fool, I forgot to press record during a whole section of doing Maximus's base. So I'm moving on to another model to complete the process. So I do apologise for the continuity here. Then to add some highlights, I'm just going to use some skeleton bone, just dry brush all over the texture. It depends on the models how much texture they have. And then once you've done that, rim the model in a colour that you like. I like brown, some people like black. And then it's just getting some grass tufts. Here I'm using some of the Gamer's Grass beige tufts. I quite like those. Feel very post-apocalyptic. So just work your way around, sticking them on. Try not to think too much about your placement, because, oh, look at that little swine trying to get away. Yeah, don't overthink your placement, just stick them on, try not to make it too regimented. And I really like these small tufts because they feel a little bit more scaled. And there we are, Maximus is now done and basically ready for a game. Love him. Love that pose, looks badass. So there we are, Maximus is now done. Fairly straightforward, just using some shade just to get some hints of rust in there. Obviously this was almost a guide to painting a Brotherhood of Steel as well, with a little nuance of rustiness added at the end. So next up is going to be using Dirty Down Rust. Now I really like Dirty Down Rust. It's a water-based paint. Get some really natural looking rust effects with just applying a little bit of heat. There are different ways that some people show you how to apply heat, whether putting the bottle in hot water or putting it on a radiator to heat it up. Some people hairdry the bottom of the bottle. I just apply it and then use a hairdryer on the actual model itself, which I find is a bit speedier and gives the same effect. So it's entirely up to you how you do it, but you're going to see the results in a moment. Right, let's crack on doing some Dirty Down. So now we're going to move on to some Dirty Down Rust. So all I'm going to do is get a couple of dollops of rust into the lid, basically using this as a palette, add a couple of dollops of water as well. And then over a model that's already been base coat up to the same point that Maximus was, there's no highlights here. I'm just going to daub this all over quite neatly. It might look a bit rough and weird at the moment, but then I'm going to get some water and add it to the actual model as well. That is the trick I found when using Dirty Down, is to do a couple of dollops neat and then just thin it down on the actual model itself. And you get a lot more irregularities with the rust that way, as opposed to being too placed and too accurate. And then I'm just going to heat it up with a hairdryer. So I couldn't get the hairdryer in shot. So I just decided to apply some again, just to, add a bit more punch to the rust effect. Because the first bit was a bit subtle, it looks quite oily, nice effect, I do like it. But adding a second coat might give me more of a rusty effect, so I'm just going to do that now. get the hairdryer to it. And it was at this point that I realised that actually I probably need a bit of a shake or a bit of an extra stir on the actual pot. That's probably why it's not doing the rust effect that I'd like. So I did that, I gave it a good stir and a good shake, and then reapplied it neatly. Initially, you don't have to do it neatly. And as I was applying it, you can see it actually started to dry and give that rust effect already because the model was already warm from me heating it up with a hairdryer. So once I started getting the hairdryer to it proper, you can see that rust effect really coming out. I think at this point it was too much rust, way too much. So all I needed to do was, because it's water-based and reactivates with water, I just didn't thin it down, moved it around. Now, when I say it reactivates with water, that's fine because you're not going to play in the bath or outside when it's raining with them. And if it does like lose some of that sort of effect, then you can just reapply some water, some heat to it. But I actually like this effect a lot more. You've got some subtlety from the original coat, and then of course you've got some rustiness going on with the actual second coat where it's been properly shaken. And you just neatly add some bits here and there if you need to. But really it does look like a Raider's suit of armour. And then just for a bit of extra definition, I just did a little bit of a dry brush on the edges just to pick out some of those edges where they might have been worn or beaten a bit more. It's up to you if you want to do the stage. Thought it looked quite cool. Just went my way around and did that. A bit more on the guns as well. I imagine the guns are probably looked after more than the actual armour. Any details that need a bit more punch, like the black as well, I just pick those out as well. Make it stand out a bit more, because things can get lost in that rust. And then for the valve at the back, and in the game it isn't red, but I thought it'd be quite nice to pick it out a bit of red. So I just used some red for that, and I didn't highlight it or wash it, I just left it as it was, because a lot of that rust and silver popped through anyway. And there we are, there is our very rusty Brotherhood of Steel, or a Raider, or a Wasteland Adventurer, doesn't matter, it's just a rusty suit. There we are, the Dirty Down Rust is now done. I really like Dirty Down Rust, as I said. I also quite like it when it goes wrong. So obviously in this video, I had some issues where if you don't shake it properly, you can see the effect of that. And if you do shake it properly, how that will look as well. But I think you could do a mix. I do like the weird sort of tarnished effect and the weird tone and oiliness it gives it if it's not been shaken. So it's entirely up to you which method you use. But obviously to get the nice rust effect, you do need to give it a good shake so it actually comes out with that bright, punchy, crusty orange. So now we're going to move on to using some streaking grime. The other two have all been water-based paints. This one does require some thinners. I've got some AK fruity scented thinners for this, but you can just use white spirit, whatever you can get your hands on. If you're not a fan of using thinners, then just skip this section entirely, but it's worth watching just to see the effect because it is quite cool. So let's crack on with some streaking grime. So we need some streaking grime and some thinners, and all I'm going to do is neatly apply that streaking grime to the model. As you can see, I've only picked out black on this and some of that death metal. I've not done anything else to the model, just a couple of colours here and there. And then I've started to add the thinners to the actual model, pretty much like adding water to the rust on the Dirty Down section. So all I'm doing is getting a dirty old brush. You can see this is a knackered old brush, and you'd need one of those for this job because it will get knackered. And then once that's applied, I'm just going to get an earbud and then just start to wipe it off. I used a little bit of thinners initially just to move it around a bit on the actual bud. The other side is dry, so when I want to remove it a little bit more, I can use the dry version of it. But initially just dabbed it into a bit of thinners just so it wasn't taking away too much. And also leaving any cotton wool on there as well. So once I've done that, just work my way around. It is quite grimy, it's quite oily. I quite like it actually, very weathered. I then thought it could do a bit more colour, so that's what I did. I had a little bit more colour. Remember in the game some of the lasers have like that cool sort of green, sort of energy battery kind of look to it. So I thought I'd apply that to these sections at the back because it looks a bit like a big battery, with some yellow sections as well. And just a bit of punch, add a bit, all this is really doing, it's probably not actually lore or canon, but I don't really care. It's just to add a bit of colour to the model, otherwise it can just be a big flat metal man. And very much like we did with Maximus, I'm just going to start picking out that Brotherhood of Steel symbol on the chest as well. Again, stylised unless there's some transfers. It's a bit tricky to do, so from a distance you'll just go, oh, Brotherhood of Steel, innit? And of course a little shield design on the arm. Don't actually know what that means. Drop it in the comments if you know. Yeah, some green, a bit messy there, but you know, once the streaking grime's on, it'll be fine. And that's what I'm doing, getting some streaking grime all over those sections. This was more of a afterthought, so I'll do it all before I start applying the streaking grime in future. Now, as I started to remove the streaking grime, what I noticed was it hadn't probably cured, the paint hadn't, and it started to remove the paint. And you know what? I was happy with this. This was a happy accident. This looked like worn and battered paint that's flecked off, and I liked it, and I kind of ran with it because it feels very dystopian and old. So yeah, that was a happy mistake, and I kept with it. Look at that. Probably couldn't do that properly with paint. Maybe I could if I put some time into it. And then a quick dry brush of a lighter silver, just to pick out those edges. Again, you can work your way around all the armour and other details you want to pick out. I did realise that the sigil on his chest got a bit dark, so that will need punching out a bit more. And there we are, our Brotherhood of Steel, who probably feels more like, I guess, a standard looking Brotherhood of Steel, I suppose, less rusty. There we are, 3 different, and I would probably say quick and simple ways of getting rust onto your models. Obviously, when I say simple, it's more the application. You do need some equipment for some of them, like a hairdryer or thinners, but they are fairly straightforward, very low entry sort of requirements. I was genuinely surprised by the effect of Maximus's rust. Obviously, I trust Army Painter's products, but the rust paint, I was like, it's just called that, isn't it? But the actual tone of it's really nice as well, so I was quite chuffed with that. Initially, I was just going to use it as a glaze for the skin to add a bit of warmth to it, like I mentioned in that section. But when I started applying it to the actual armour, I was like, yeah, this is actually really, really good. It's very subtle. It reminds me of like the combat armour sections you'd pick up in Fallout, or some of the suits you'd see hanging around. It's just like subtle amounts of rust here and there. So big fan of that paint. Dirty Down, however, will always be my firm favourite. The first time I used it, I was taken and besotted with the paint because it just looks like rust, and you don't even need to put any effort into the model before that if you just want a rusty mess. So the section where we did that was more just to demonstrate how far you can go if you want to do something for a raider or a really battered piece of armour that's been out in the wastelands for too long. Entirely up to you, but I do like the effect. And I like the effect when it goes wrong as well. Like I mentioned, you know, if you're not shaking the bottle up too much, the sort of weird oiliness that gives off, I really like that. So it's great. It's great paint. Streaking Grime, I mean, that is got a bit of a barrier to entry because it requires thinners, which is fair. Not everyone has the access to thinners, especially if you're a younger audience watching this. Not ideal. But I only sprayed the model silver, picked out some black, obviously added some other colours at the end, and then just used Streaking Grime. There was no shading, there was no highlighting, and it kind of does a lot of the hard work for you. I've done a few models with Streaking Grime in the past, and I do like the effects it gets. It depends on how grimy you want your models, and it looked pretty good. I was pretty pleased with the end result for the Streaking Grime, and considering the little amount of effort that was put into the model before that was applied. So that's a win as well, I think. As with this video, there's been like 3 different ways of painting rust. You could combine all 3, you know, get different effects, different levels of corrosion and rust. This isn't just solely designed for like anyone wanting to paint some power armor for Fallout. This can be used for anything, whether it's 40k models, Nurgle stuff for Age of Sigmar 40k, whatever, or anything else. You know, there's plenty of games out there that has rust and corrosion in their miniatures. So this is just hopefully a useful video with 3 different ways of doing that quickly and effectively. As always, thank you for watching this. Thank you to my patrons as well for your massive, massive support. You guys are amazing. Without you, I wouldn't obviously do this. In fact, without you, I probably wouldn't have even done this because it was your suggestion to go, hey, Peach, hit the Fallout vibe. It's quite popular at the moment. I was like, yeah, maybe we should. I've got some Fallout models. There will be more Fallout content later on. I've got some of the raiders over there, the operators, and the pack, I think they're called the pack, the ones with all the teddy bears strapped to them. They're pretty cool. Got some gunners as well. I always like the gunners. I think they're a cool faction, so I'll definitely cover them at some point. But yes, thank you to you beautiful people. As in the words of Fallout, war never changes, but you know, models do, and rust gets worse. So yeah, love you all. See you in the next one. Bye. Peachy out. I probably don't have any bloopers this time. Or maybe him dropping off. Yeah, remember that. Yeah. Right, bye. This is the Sean Bean thing again. You've been there all day. I set you up last night and you've been there all day, and only now, when the camera's rolling, did you where the hell has he gone? In this video, heads will roll.